Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. And today we're tackling a book that's practically a legend in personal finance, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I mean, you requested this one, and for good reason, right?
Yeah.
This book has really shaken things up for how a lot of people think about money.
Yeah, it's definitely a bit of a financial earthquake. I think one of the things that makes Rich Dad, Poor Dad so impactful is how Kiyosaki sets up this contrast, between the two dads. Like, you have the poor dad, his biological father, who represents that more traditional play-it-safe approach to money.
Right, that kind of like work hard, get a steady job, and save kind of mentality.
Exactly. And then you have this rich dad figure, his best friend's father, who's all about entrepreneurship, investing, and really understanding the mechanics of how money works. So by putting these two philosophies side by side, it really forces you to question some of those deeply ingrained beliefs we have about building a secure financial future.
So as we go through this deep dive, what are we hoping to uncover? What are the core lessons Kiyosaki is trying to get across? And how do they challenge those conventional ideas about money?
Well, I think our main goal here is to pull out those key financial lessons that form the foundation of Kiyosaki's philosophy. We're going to look at how he kind of flips the script on typical financial advice. And ultimately, we want to see what practical insights you can take away from all this and maybe even start applying to your own life.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah.
And one of the first things that jumps out from the book is this huge emphasis on financial education, almost like it's some sort of secret code that the rich understand, but the rest of us just never learned.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Kiyosaki's argument is that traditional education systems, like schools, they mainly focus on preparing us for jobs, to work for someone else. They teach us skills, but they often fall short when it comes to teaching us about money itself, like how to manage it, how to invest it, how to make it grow. He makes the point that wealthy people aren't necessarily more intelligent, but they have this different level of understanding about how money operates, how it flows.
And he calls this understanding financial literacy, which, as you said, goes way beyond just balancing your checkbook or creating a budget.
Exactly. To Kiyosaki, financial literacy is about really understanding those four key elements: assets, liabilities, taxes, and cash flow. And more importantly, it's about how these things work together. The big difference he highlights is between this mindset of working for a paycheck, which is what most of us are taught to do, versus building a system where your assets are working for you. It's about shifting from trading your time for money to generating income that's not tied to the hours you put in.
So it's not just about saving a portion of what you earn. It's about being proactive and strategic about how you use those savings to build something more. And one of the key strategies he talks about is acquiring assets, right?
Absolutely. It's an active process of learning and then putting what you learn into action. Kiyosaki really emphasizes that financial education isn't like a one-time event. It's this ongoing journey where you're continuously learning and acquiring income-generating assets over time. And he also stresses the importance of real-world experience. Learning from your successes, but also from those setbacks, is a huge part of becoming financially savvy. It's often more valuable than just having theoretical knowledge from a textbook.
It makes a lot of sense. And that brings us to what is probably one of the most fundamental and sometimes controversial ideas in the book, the distinction between assets and liabilities. It kind of challenges the way a lot of people traditionally think about these terms.
Yeah, for sure. Kiyosaki defines these terms very specifically, and understanding those definitions is crucial to understanding his whole framework. So for him, an asset is anything that puts money in your pocket consistently. Think of things like rental properties, where the rent you receive is more than your expenses, stocks that pay out regular dividends, or a business that's profitable and can run even when you're not directly involved.
Okay, so that's an asset. What about a liability? How does he define that?
A liability, on the other hand, is something that takes money out of your pocket. It's those things we often have to pay for on an ongoing basis, like car loans, credit card debt, or the expenses associated with owning a home.
Now, this is where I think some people might get a little confused, because he often talks about your primary residence, the house you live in, as potentially being a liability. And that goes against what a lot of people are taught, right? That your home is your biggest asset. So why does he make that argument?
I think what's really insightful about Kiyosaki's perspective is his focus on cash flow. While it's true that a house can appreciate in value over the long term, in the day-to-day reality for most homeowners, It's a constant outflow of cash. You've got your mortgage payments, especially the interest portion of those payments, property taxes, insurance, and then all the regular maintenance and upkeep. Unless that property is generating income for you, like if you're renting out a portion of it, it's constantly pulling money out of your pocket. And that's why he categorizes it as a liability, at least from a cash flow perspective. It's not that he's against owning a home. He just wants you to be really clear-eyed about the financial impact it has in the short term and not just automatically assume it's a money-making asset.
It's a real shift in how you view things. And it makes you think differently about where your money is going. So for someone listening, how could they actually start applying this asset versus liability concept to their own finances? Like, where would you even begin?
I think a great place to start is by doing a little self-assessment. Really take an honest look at where your money is going right now. Make a list of all your regular expenses, and then try to categorize each one based on Kiyosaki's definitions. Ask yourself, is this expense truly putting money in my pocket, or is it consistently draining my funds? Just that simple act of categorizing can be incredibly eye-opening. It can really highlight those areas where you might want to consider making some different choices with your money.
That's a great starting point. And then building on this understanding of assets and liabilities, Kiyosaki introduces this concept of the rat race, which I think a lot of people, especially those working traditional jobs, can relate to.
Definitely. The rat race is his metaphor for that feeling of being stuck in this never-ending cycle of work and bills. You go to your job, you get your paycheck, you pay your bills, and then you just repeat the process over and over. And the problem, as Kiyosaki sees it, is that people caught in this cycle are so focused on just earning a bigger paycheck from their job that they don't really focus on building a portfolio of assets that could eventually give them financial freedom.
So to escape this rat race, it's not necessarily about climbing the corporate ladder and getting that next promotion. It's about changing your focus and prioritizing the acquisition of assets that generate income independently.
That's exactly it. Kiyosaki is all about building what he calls passive income streams, which is income that comes in without you having to directly trade your time for it. He sees this as the key to breaking free from that rat race mentality and achieving true financial freedom, where your income from your assets is actually greater than all your expenses combined.
And I'm curious, what are some real-life examples of these passive income streams? What does that actually look like?
There are a lot of possibilities. One could be starting a side business that you can eventually grow to a point where it can run somewhat independently, generating profits even when you're not actively working in it. Another example is investing in dividend-paying stocks. So as a shareholder, you receive regular payments from those companies.
Oh, right, like those quarterly dividends.
Exactly. And then there's real estate where you purchase properties and rent them out. The goal here is to have the rental income cover all the expenses associated with the property and then provide a surplus that goes into your pocket. Kiyosaki also mentions creating intellectual property, like writing a book or developing software that can generate royalties over time. The common thread with all these is that you're creating systems that generate income without being directly tied to the number of hours you work.
That's a really powerful concept. And speaking of different ways to build wealth, Kiyosaki is clearly a big advocate for entrepreneurship and investing. He often portrays these as faster routes to wealth accumulation than just sticking with a traditional job.
Oh yeah, that's definitely a central theme in the book. The rich dad figure is constantly guiding Kiyosaki towards developing that entrepreneurial mindset and becoming an active investor. And what's interesting is his perspective on risk. The rich dad teaches that trying to avoid all risk can actually be riskier in the long run, and that making mistakes, as long as they're calculated and you learn from them, is part of the process.
It's a different way of thinking, especially for people who might have been raised to value job security and avoid financial risks. What would be a good first step for someone who's intrigued by this entrepreneurial and investing mindset, but maybe a little hesitant to take any big leaps right away? Like, how can they dip their toes in the water?
That's a great question. I think starting small is key. A good approach is to experiment with some low-risk business ideas or make small, well-researched investments. It could be something as simple as offering a service you're good at in your free time, or maybe selling a product online. Or you could invest a small amount in a diversified index fund just to get a feel for how the market works. The point is to gain some practical experience, get comfortable with the process, and learn from your early experiences, both good and bad, without risking a ton of money up front.
So it's about taking those baby steps and building up your confidence. Now, for someone listening to this and thinking, okay, this all sounds interesting, but how do I actually start applying these ideas in my own life? What would be your top recommendations? Where should they focus their energy?
Well, first and foremost, echoing Kiyosaki's emphasis, I'd say commit to continuous financial education. Actively seek out information and resources that can help you understand how money works on a deeper level. You could read more books on personal finance and investing, listen to podcasts like this one, or maybe take some online courses. The goal is to keep expanding your knowledge and becoming more financially literate.
Okay, so education is the foundation. What comes next?
Then you need to shift your focus from learning to actually building that asset column. Now, this doesn't mean you have to go out and buy a bunch of properties or anything drastic. It could start with consistently investing a small portion of your income in the stock market, or maybe taking those first steps to launch that side hustle you've been thinking about. Remember, the key is consistency and making choices that align with building those income-generating assets.
So it's about changing your mindset, right? Moving away from thinking like an employee and starting to think more like an investor or an entrepreneur. Always be on the lookout for opportunities to create those additional income streams.
Yeah, exactly. It's about cultivating a mindset where you're constantly looking for ways to generate income beyond your regular paycheck. And a practical step that can be really helpful is to start tracking your cash flow meticulously. Create a simple spreadsheet where you track every dollar coming in and every dollar going out. This can reveal a lot about your spending habits and help you identify areas where you might be able to free up some funds to invest in building those assets.
Now, it's important to acknowledge that Rich Dad, Poor Dad has received its fair share of criticism over the years. Not everyone agrees with everything Kiyosaki says. So what are some of the main points of contention or pushback you've encountered regarding the book and its advice?
That's a really good point. It's crucial to remember that not everyone is on board with Kiyosaki's views. One common criticism is that some of his advice might be too simplistic or potentially too risky for some people, especially those who are already struggling financially or have a very low tolerance for risk. And there have also been questions raised about whether all the stories he tells in the book are entirely accurate or maybe embellished a bit for dramatic effect.
So it's not like a one-size-fits-all guaranteed roadmap to financial success. You have to take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah, and it's always a good idea to approach any financial advice with a healthy dose of skepticism and to consider your own unique situation and risk tolerance. Another point that people often bring up is that for those who are dealing with a lot of debt or struggling to make ends meet, the immediate focus needs to be on getting those basics in order before jumping into investment. It's like you need to build a solid foundation before you can start building the skyscraper.
That makes sense. You can't really run before you can walk.
But even with those criticisms in mind, I think it's important to circle back to Kiyosaki's core message about the importance of financial education. No matter where you are on your financial journey, taking the time to learn about how money works and understanding the principles of building assets can be incredibly valuable in the long run. It's about planting those seeds of financial literacy and shifting your perspective on money.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Rich Dad, Poor Dad, what's the biggest takeaway you hope listeners will remember, even if they don't agree with everything in the book?
For me, the central message is that achieving financial freedom requires you to be proactive, informed, and strategic. Rich Dad, Poor Dad really encourages you to question those traditional norms around money and to shift your mindset. It's about moving away from just being an employee and starting to think and act like an investor and a builder of assets. And even if some of the specific strategies in the book might not be right for everyone, that core emphasis on financial literacy and the power of creating income-generating assets is something that can benefit just about anyone.
It's a really empowering message. So what's one concrete action our listener could take today, inspired by the book, to get started on that path to financial freedom?
I'd say a good first step would be to set one specific, achievable financial goal based on what we've discussed today. It could be something as simple as committing to save a certain amount each week, or setting aside some time to research different investment options, or maybe you brainstorm a few side hustle ideas that align with your skills and interests. Then, and this is the most important part, take one small action towards that goal today. Even a small step can create momentum and get you moving in the right direction.
That's great advice. And finally, to leave our listeners with something to ponder, what's one conventional financial belief that they might want to question after listening to this deep dive? Something that Rich Dad, Poor Dad challenges that they might want to explore further on their own.
Here's a thought-provoking question to consider. Is diligently saving money in a traditional savings account really the safest and most effective way to build long-term financial security? Given Kiyosaki's emphasis on the impact of inflation and the importance of making your money work for you through investments, it's worth asking yourself if simply saving is enough. Maybe it's time to explore other avenues for growing your wealth and achieving true financial freedom. It's an invitation to dig deeper and form your own conclusions about what works best for you and your financial goals.